Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tavis Piatoli, sports dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and today I'm going to be your host. Over 70% of the U.S. is overweight or obese, and it is estimated that 45 million Americans go on a diet each year, spending roughly $33 billion on weight loss programs and products. These programs usually advise the cutting out or lowering of carbohydrates, the use of fasting techniques, or recommend dietary supplements. But what if you could manipulate your diet and food intake to help you increase the amount of fat your body uses as fuel throughout the day? In this podcast, I speak with exercise physiologist and sports dietitian Bob Seebohar on how to become more metabolically efficient at using fat as a fuel source. We also discuss macronutrient needs for strength versus endurance athletes, fat burning zones, the best ratio of carbohydrates to protein for blood sugar control, and why carbohydrates are demonized. Now, stay tuned until the end to learn more about Bob's certification program and the only 3 foods he could survive on forever. Bob, welcome to the All Me podcast. It's such an honor to have you. Always love chatting, and it's great to talk sports dietitian to sports dietitian today.
Oh, Tavis, thank you for having me. It's an honor being here. I love our chats, and I love being able to provide a little bit of education for your listeners. Absolutely.
So today we're talking about something that it's kind of like your baby, metabolic efficiency, but more specifically, metabolic efficiency training. We'll get into that.
Yep.
And before we really dive into what all that is and defining those types of terms, let's talk about your career path first as a dietitian. Really, what led to you to pursue a career working with athletes?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because I actually get asked this quite a bit, and my story never changes, but I do smile and laugh and chuckle because I did it kind of very different than your traditional registered dietitian, sport dietitian. So after high school, I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't want to go to college right away. So I actually took, they call it a gap year now, but we didn't, I just took a year off and worked and saved money for college and stuff. Right. And kind of freaked my mom out because she didn't think I was going to college. I'm like, settle down. I'm going to school. I'm just not ready. So I tell you what, Tavis, the only thing I knew is that I grew up an athlete. I grew up playing soccer and basketball in a mountain town in Colorado, and I love sports. If you would have asked me back then, what do you want to be when you grow up? It would have been professional athlete. I think most boys had that. And I had no idea why I was going to school, to be honest with you, to college. All I knew was that I had a good friend in high school. He was a year ahead of me. He was at Colorado State University. He was like, yeah, I'm studying sports medicine. I'm like, cool. What's that? Sports? Okay. Sports, sign me up. I'm not even kidding, Tavis. I went to CSU and I declared, exercise and sports science as my major. I started in sports medicine because I thought I wanted to be a physical therapist, only because it had to do with athletes. So that kind of started my whole career path. I think me being an athlete turned into my career of working with athletes, because obviously, mountain town boy playing basketball and soccer, you're not going to go very far, right? So I had to rely more on my brains at that point. But I actually started so non-traditional. My undergrad is in exercise science, is exercise physiology, like not an inkling of nutrition, but I kept an athlete. I turned into an endurance athlete my undergrad, my sophomore year, and I was really digging endurance, triathlon specific. And there was a lot of things that were going wrong for me nutritionally, and I didn't know why. And, I definitely was not that success story. After I graduated with my exercise phys degree, I was a strength coach, I was a personal trainer. I worked for 3 years in the quote unquote real world. And I think, a lot of people say, why did you go back to school? And I think, I was bored. To be honest with you, I was just bored. And, I was kind of getting more into endurance sports and trying to figure out why my nutrition was not working for Ironman racing and all this stuff. So I went back to school. And here's the thing, when I went back to school after 3 years of being out in the field and, working in various health professional jobs, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, right? So I went back. I'm like, okay, I'll study, exercise physiology again. And I was blessed to have, a graduate teaching position, so that paid for my tuition and so on and so forth. And I decided to stay an extra year because at that point, this was my turning point. When I was in my first graduate degree work, I had a friend and we actually started the volunteer sport nutrition program at Colorado State University because I did all my grad work there too. And once we started that, I actually started working with some athletes. I was not a registered dietitian yet, so we were just educating. That's it. Just not really counseling, just educating, doing some presentations. And I said, this is pretty cool, right? I'm kind of digging this. And I started figuring out my own nutrition. That's the whole bias thing. And I thought I wanted to do a PhD in nutrition and actually went down that road. I don't know if I ever told you that, but was accepted into the program, almost pulled the trigger, and I just decided I didn't want to stay in academia. Not that you have to, right? But I ended up getting a second master's degree, and that was my food science and human nutrition degree, which led to me becoming a registered dietitian. And I guess you could say now the rest is history because I completely carved my path in sport nutrition because unbeknownst to many people, I actually developed a niche early on in my career. And because I was getting into that endurance sports, triathlon specifically, I was so fascinated at it and why I was so not good as a triathlete that I was trying to be better and better and better. And I remember I told my preceptor when we were trying to determine my internship and where I was going to go for my RD internship. She said, "What do you want to do?" I said, I'm going to be a sport nutritionist." And she just laughed and laughed. And Tavis, you and I'm a little older than you, but you and I are fairly the same age. And I mean, you remember those days? There was nothing in sport nutrition back then. And I'm going to date myself right now, but this is the late 90s, early 2000s. And she was laughing at me. I'm like, I'll do whatever I can do. I'll just carve my own path. And 20 plus years later, here I sit.
It's funny. We might be the same age because I started my undergrad in '94. And,
okay. Yeah.
And my first book that I came across with sports nutrition was Nancy Clark's Sports Nutrition.
Yes.
So
totally.
We had similar paths in a way because I wanted to be a pediatrician. That was my goal, doctor. And, partying and pre-med at LSU was not a good combination. So when you start your first semester on academic probation and your mom's like, "Hey, if you don't fix this, I'm not helping you. You're going to have to take out a big loan and do this." So I got out of that. And then looking through a curriculum book, I'm like, "Oh, sports nutrition. I like sports. I lost a bunch of weight. That sounds cool. Let me go to some classes." And, kind of like you, the rest was history. It's kind of a weird way how you find the path.
It is. And nowadays I think it's a much more linear path because there are so many opportunities in sport nutrition now.
Oh, it's massive. It's absolutely massive.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So let's dive into, what we're talking about today which is the term metabolic efficiency. So number one, what is metabolic efficiency? Can you give our listeners a little bit about what this term means?
Yeah, well, a little bit of backstory. So I kind of gave you a little bit of how I grew up, and at least with schooling and stuff. And I was a team sport athlete. Then I turned into an endurance athlete and had a lot of things to figure out because nutrition is so different. At least it was back then because we didn't know as much as we know these days. So early in those days when I was trying to personally figure out my nutrition for Ironman racing specifically, I remember my first Ironman was 1999. And I literally there were not many long training days that I felt good digestively, right? I'd thrown up, bad bowel movements, whatever it was. And I could not figure it out. And I'm like, for goodness sake, what is going on here? So the whole concept of metabolic efficiency training stemmed because I personally was having serious GI distress during training and during racing. I thought I was the only one. This is, fast forward a few years, I got my registered dietitian. I was counseling athletes, endurance athletes here in Colorado. And I started to notice a lot of them, as we were talking, a lot of them complained of the same thing. So they had to hit the porta potties quite a bit and they weren't feeling good and very disruptive, nausea, vomiting during training and racing. And I was like, oh, I thought it was just me. I thought, people told me back then, that's just a rite of passage for being an Ironman athlete. You got to suck it up. And I'm like, No, I'm pretty sure you don't have to suck it up. So I wanted to get rid of my GI distress and help others. So I went back to the books, Tavis. I was like, yeah, man, did I forget something? Did I sleep through one of those lectures? Did I miss something? So, which we won't talk about that, right? But I looked at everything, like I just scoured the research and I looked at things inside and out. I looked at old textbooks, physiology, metabolism, you name it. And I came across this thing called the crossover concept. And this is just basic exercise physiology 101. And I had remembered that, but I think I took ex-phys like my sophomore year of undergrad. So I mean, I wasn't remembering any of that. So basically there's an association. This was the crossover concept tells you there's an association between the body's intensity level or the intensity of exercise. So low to high intensity, your body will actually prefer to use either fat or carbohydrate at lower or higher intensities. So what I was noticing was that at higher intensities, the body burns more carbohydrates or oxidizes more carbohydrate. And then at lower intensity, this is what we know, it utilizes or burns more fat. So I looked into that a little bit and I said, oh, that's interesting. And then I looked into the fact that, we have almost unlimited fat stores in our body, but we have very finite or very limited carbohydrate stores. And me as an Ironman athlete at that time, you're out there for a few hours during the day. And I'm thinking, okay, if I don't have a lot of carbs and I have a lot of fat, is there an opportunity that I can use science or food with science to actually train my body to be better at using my fat stores and preserving my carbohydrate stores until later in the race? And of course, the answer to that question is yes. This is where metabolic efficiency training was born. But this is what I ran into. In the 1950s and 60s is when this crossover concept was developed by very good exercise physiologists. They only looked at the exercise intervention of that. So basically, they assigned a percentage of maximum heart rate or VO2 max relative to where your body crossed from fat burning to more carbohydrate burning. And back then, they identified it between 63 and 65%. And that's what you see. Like if you go in a health club still, you see the treadmills or the ellipticals, and it has the pretty little graph on the side, and it says fat burning zone. That's where that data comes from, which is really interesting because it's so wrong. It is absolutely wrong. So what I decided was I wanted to test out the nutrition. And what I started to do was I started to manipulate not only my daily nutrition, but other athletes, let me do this. I manipulated their nutrition and basically just their macros. So I played around with their fat, their carbs, their protein. They kept exercise the same. And what I found was that there was a way through changing macronutrients. So basically just adjusting food, you could teach your body to burn or store fat or carbohydrate more efficiently or less efficiently. And that is where metabolic efficiency training, where it was really birthed. So to your first question that I took a long time answering, metabolic efficiency training is basically using nutrition to enhance your body's ability to use either fat or carbohydrates and store either fat and more carbohydrates. So, because you can do one or the other. The body's pretty smart. And sometimes maybe you do want to burn more carbohydrate and store more fat. I can't think of too many instances, but there's every so often it pops up. But that's a long-winded answer to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I appreciate that. And you mentioned a little bit about energy stores, and we have a little bit of carbohydrate availability, but a lot of fat. Can you kind of break that down? Because our listeners are probably like, all right, what does it mean? He says we don't have a lot of carbs, but we have a lot of fat. What does that look like?
Yeah. So we predominantly store carbohydrate in our liver, muscle, and there's a little bit floating around in our blood glucose, our blood sugar. The majority of our carbohydrates are stored in our muscle. So depending on gender and size of or body size and muscle mass, females, and I'm talking mostly adults right now, most adult females will have roughly 1,200 to 1,400 calories worth of carbohydrates stored in their body, right? A larger male could have upwards of 2,000, maybe 2,200 calories. But if you put that in context, because a lot of people are like, oh, that's a lot of calories. If you put it in context with exercise, that amount of calories from carbohydrates will only satisfy energy needs for about 2 to 3 hours of moderate intense exercise. So if you go for a bike ride or a run, or if you're out in the field for a couple hours, you're going to significantly decrease your carbohydrate stores very quickly. And that's the problem. That's the whole, quote unquote bonking thing. And that's why we have to refeed so often, because our blood sugar takes such a hit so much faster than our fat does. Now there's an interesting balance here, of course, but our bodies, male and female, can store at least 60, 70, 80,000. 60, 70, 80,000 calories worth of fat in our body sits at any one time. Even, like if you watch the Olympics and like those really lean, itty bitty marathon runners, like they still probably have about 30 to 40,000 calories of fat in your body. Now, if you do the math, that could last you days and days and days of exercising. You probably wouldn't feel that great if you're not going to input anything. But there's this whole dichotomy that we have such limited stores of carbs and so many of fat that we just, and this was just, back in the days, Tavis, I was just looking at athletically, like I was just looking at GI distress. Fast forward, now we have all these great health benefits of really metabolic efficiency training. I mean, obviously looking at decreasing prediabetes, obesity, some types of like heart related disorders. I mean, that's really looking at the whole picture. This is not just athletic based. This is also health based.
So is this why, like, if two people are stuck in the wild for, let's say, a month, the person with the highest fat stores is probably going to be a little bit more efficient at using fat and live a little longer?
Usually, yeah. And I say usually because it is dietary related also. So it does depend on that person's diet. Because what I'll say is, we've all heard the don't judge a book by its cover, because you can have very lean individuals who are extremely high fat burners because dietarily they have changed, or they have trained their body to do that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, when we look at, you mentioned fat and carbohydrate are both fuel sources, right? And we have a lot more fat, a lot less carbohydrate. Is there a preferred fuel source? And earlier you were talking about intensities and, using
great points.
Yep.
Great point. So this is where I think a lot of people kind of jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, well, if that's the case, I'm just going to eat all fat. I'm going to go keto. I'm going to do all this. I'm like, no. That's not the message here, because you have to put it in context of what sport or activity somebody is doing. So as an example, I work with gymnastics quite a bit. It's a very, very glycolytic, carbohydrate driven, very powerful, explosive sport. At most their competitions, if they're doing floor, that's the longest competition, and that's about 90 seconds, right? So vault is about under 10 seconds. But so what I'm saying is the more explosive power based athletes or sports, they actually need more carbohydrate, because carbohydrate is immediate fuel. Carbohydrates actually will metabolize much faster and turn into ATP or energy much faster than fat. So those are the type of people or athletes, I will say, that and you still want to balance your blood sugar, like with carbs, protein, and fat, which I know we're going to chat about. But those are the sports that I kind of separate and say, okay, you might be more carbohydrate dominant. Protein and fat are still important, but you're more carbohydrate dominant. And then maybe that endurance athlete, maybe that triathlete, that ultra runner, that marathoner, cyclist, whoever it is, yeah, maybe they still need carbohydrate, which we know they do, but maybe they don't need as much because their relative intensity of training and racing is lower. It's not as explosive. And that's where that whole metabolic efficiency training and that cross between fat and carbohydrate oxidation or burning comes into play, because that's where we want to tailor it to each athlete. Now, I will say this really quick, because I work with a lot of endurance athletes, and a lot of endurance athletes, even if they do long distance racing, they will do very high intensity training at times throughout the year. So what I actually do is I'll periodize their nutrition to support the high intensity training. And that's actually where I put a little bit more carbohydrate into their daily nutrition plan to support that higher end training, versus maybe it's a track workout or hill repeats or whatever. They need more carbohydrates there versus their maybe 3 or 4 hour long bike ride on the weekend that might be a lot less intense. So I think we need to kind of keep that in perspective of the type of athlete, yes, but also the mode of activity and the objective of that training goal for that day.
So you're manipulating the carb intake based on really the intensity and volume of that exercise.
Exactly. And I will say this, there is a health component. I do believe like everything I do is health first, performance second. So there is definitely a health goal here too. So sometimes, I mean, I'm just an example. If someone does have diabetes or pre-diabetes, I'll be very sensitive to the carbohydrate periodization. It's there, but it's a lot more structured and a lot more justified versus someone who maybe is I don't want to say completely healthy, but has no risk factors for disease states.
So let's shift a little bit to protein, because the young athletes today, you walk into
Oh,
football, baseball, and it's like, what do you need to do for energy? Protein,
totally.
Let's eat enormous
Protein.
amounts, right? So we
Oh,
know young athletes tend to think a lot of protein is needed for energy. But when we look at protein, does it play any role in the metabolic efficiency equation? But also, is it an efficient source of energy?
great question. And I hear I just actually did a consult on a young eighth grader football, and a lot of our conversation was centered on protein, and I knew it would be like protein and creatine, right, Tavis? Those were the two main things.
Yes,
I'm
yep.
like, hey, maybe we need to talk about some things before that. But yeah, to your point, protein is extremely important in helping to balance blood sugar. And let me kind of go back because I really didn't explain this well. To be metabolically efficient, so to teach your body to use more of its fat stores and store more of its carbohydrate stores, which is kind of what most people want to do for the most part. To do that, we need to eat food that balances our blood sugar, right? So we can't eat something that will shoot our blood sugar, through the roof and drop us 10 or 15 minutes later. I always give the example of a banana. I'm not a good and bad food kind of guy. I'm not the calorie counting dietitian either. But so a banana is not bad by any means, right? But in this example, a banana only has carbohydrate. So if you eat a banana by itself, it's going to raise your blood sugar quite abruptly. It's going to spike it, right? And then you might be feeling great for 10, 20 minutes. Your blood sugar is going to drop. You're going to feel very vulnerable. You're going to feel like you need sugar or caffeine. And the cycle is just going to go over and over and over. And that's what we want to avoid, right? The reason why is because one, especially young athletes, I mean, we need to maintain their energy level pretty steady throughout the day because, they're waking up at dark 30. They might, depending on the sport, they might have an early morning practice. They might go to school pretty early. Then they have 6 to 7, 8 hours a day in school. Then they might practice right after school. So obviously we see controlling blood sugar is so important for everybody, right? And not just young athletes, but this is where protein comes into play. Back to my banana example, if you put a big spoonful of nut butter with that banana, your blood sugar will not spike. It'll be nice and even. It'll roll a little bit, but it won't spike. That means your energy level stays very, very similar and very steady, only because that nut butter has protein and it also has fat. So protein has a very good blood sugar stabilizing effect. It's not necessarily a good source of energy. So I'm not going to say, hey, you're going to go out for a run, have 5 eggs before you run. It's not a great source of energy because it gets broken up into amino acids and they kind of float around the body and go to where they're needed. But so I would say protein, definitely not a great source of energy, but protein is crucial in maintaining blood sugar, which allows energy to be stable throughout the day via the carbohydrate and fat also coming in from food intake.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good way to kind of promote that. A lot of people don't understand when it comes to hunger control. I know we're not talking hunger today, but that's where protein comes in, and you combine that with fiber and good quality carbs. And also when you put peanut butter on a banana, I just think I love bananas, but it just tastes so much better.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. It makes it.
Absolutely. Now, I know a lot of listeners are like, well, how do I use more fat as fuel? So let's talk a little bit about that. What are some steps that the average person can take to use more fat as a fuel source?
Well, let me just debunk this myth because someone's thinking it. I just know it because it always comes up. They're like, oh, metabolic efficiency or metabolic. So let me actually go back here. Metabolic efficiency is just basically exactly what it says. It's making your metabolism more efficient, right? Metabolic efficiency training. Now, once we have that train, so this is where metabolic efficiency training, and when I kind of devised this in the early 2000s, I was like, I actually wasn't even planning on making this public. I was like, I need to be a better sport dietitian. I need to figure out my philosophy better, my implementation strategy, so athletes get it. And then I started, talking to other athletes. We were talking, and coaches and sport dietitians. And I was like, man, why aren't we talking the same language here? Like, this doesn't make sense. Because you remember I told you earlier, like I grew up as, first off, as a physiologist, strength coach. Then I became a dietitian. And I was so perplexed why dietitians didn't know about periodization. They didn't know how to speak to athletes. I'm like, and this was a while ago, right? But I'm like, what's going on, right? What's happening here? So when I started devising this metabolic efficiency training concept, I wanted to devise strategies, so both nutrition and exercise strategies using science and what we already knew. I just brought those to the limelight and said, okay, this is actually how we do it. So metabolic efficiency training, if we're just talking nutrition, there are a few different strategies to introduce your body's increase your body's efficiency in using its fat stores, right? So the easiest one, honestly, we're talking about blood sugar. All of this comes down to how do we control and regulate and optimize blood sugar? It is literally looking at how or the ratio. And I know this is going to sound really weird. People are like, oh, I just checked out. He said ratio. We're talking numbers. I'm not talking numbers at all, because I do not like numbers, especially when it comes to daily nutrition, because it just confuses athletes, right? So I actually devised what I call the hand model. So you actually use your hands, your right and left hand, and you kind of use that. And there's a lot of wiggle room here, but there always is anyway, right? We're trying to develop a healthy relationship with food and not having the handcuffs on of trying to calorie count and measure and all this stuff. But basically, we know, and I did my research, and I actually looked at a lot of research in people with diabetes and found out that they were doing this in the diabetes world. I took it and I manipulated it and made it into an athletic model. But what we know is there's a certain ratio of carbohydrates to protein. And I'm not going to talk about fat yet. It's a certain ratio of carb to protein that is ideal for blood sugar control. So with your permission, I will actually discuss this. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is what we know. 1 part of carbohydrate to 1 part of protein. And you're saying, what is a part? Well, that's where the hand model comes into play. Like again, I'm not pulling this out of thin air. I did a whole bunch of scientific research on this. So I knew the quantity if we're talking about the size of your hand, I know the quantity of carbs, roughly speaking, and the quantity of protein. Here's what we know. 1 hand of carbohydrate to 1 hand of protein is ideal for optimizing blood sugar. Absolutely ideal. You will not have any spikes. You'll feel amazing through the day. Just everything is just running on all cylinders, except if you're an athlete. You don't want to do this in preseason or during season because you're not going to eat enough food. You're not going to have enough calories because, as you can imagine, balancing carbs and protein at a 1-to-1 ratio, you're going to be very full for a very long time, which is usually great, except if you're engaging in high training or competition, because your body needs more calories, it needs more food. So especially the young athlete, we need to be really careful about that. So what I tell athletes is, even though this 1-to-1 ratio is fantastic, it's the best, we need to kind of be smart about using it at a certain time of the year. And maybe that's an off season, depending on goals. If there's any weight loss goals or body composition goals, that's sometimes a good time to use it. But where I usually have athletes sit, Tavis, is between the 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 ratio. So that means 2 hands of carbohydrate to 1 hand of protein, all the way up to 3 hands of carbs to 1 hand of protein. So it's, like I said, that is just fantastic for controlling blood sugar. It's easy to do. You're going to get your calories you need. Even if you think, oh my gosh, I'm eating a lot of carbs, you're balancing it with protein, so your blood sugar stays nice and stable. You're not going to get into the low energy availability. Well, most likely, depends on the person in the sport, obviously, but that is just ideal. It's such an easy way to teach people too, because they don't have to count calories, they don't have to weigh anything. And to be honest with you, a lot of my quantitative athletes, because as you can imagine, I work with some very analytical athletes, being endurance athletes, and they're like, but what about the grams? What about the numbers? I'm like, you can count if you really want to. I'm not going to poo-poo that, but there are so many other great things in life that you can spend time doing. And I just don't know if that's one of them, because that has inaccuracies also, right? So, because people are like, oh, well, the hand model, what about peanut butter? What about yogurt? I'm like, you just kind of have to eyeball it. Sometimes you have to look at the label if it's something like that, or maybe eat a piece of chicken. Well, how thick? I don't know. As thick as you want it, so there's what we're trying to teach in nutrition is there is a way, but it's not always set, right? So there's a lot of wiggle room and manipulation, because we want to teach people to eat intuitively also. So we actually want to teach them about their hunger and their satiety. So I kind of go at it from different angles.
Well, and you keep it simple. That, I think when you're dealing with a young individual too, like you said, you don't want to give numbers and ratios. They already
Totally.
have so much on their plate. The last thing you want a kid to be doing is bringing out a food scale and weighing food.
Yeah, totally. Well,
So,
and they don't understand it. They're like, why am I like why? And we
right.
know they don't have any time anyway. But yeah, it's like the worst thing to do. I don't think I've prescribed numbers for daily nutrition probably since, let's see, I got out of my RD internship. About 3 months out of my internship, I was doing that because I thought, as you know, that's what they teach us in our internship. Like, you're in the hospital, you have to refeed people to get them out of the hospital beds. And I learned really quick that athletes did not appreciate numbers, even though they thought they did. They didn't.
Yeah, no, it's a little overwhelming at times.
It is
Right.
totally.
So this question, I'm going to try to phrase this the right way, but look, for those interested in fat loss, but they may not want, they may want to maintain their lean tissue and body weight. They just come and say, all right, I need to lose fat, but I like where I am scale wise.
Yeah.
Can this approach help someone lose more body fat without losing weight on the scale?
Yeah, great question. And it is totally doable. Obviously, it is very N of one, but I'm going to speak in general terms. General terms, here's the beauty about controlling blood. I say this earlier because I'm pretty sure we were getting to this, right? When your blood sugar spikes, so back to the banana example, if you eat a banana, your blood sugar spikes, you're feeling great, then you feel like poop, right? About 10 minutes, 20 minutes later, we just go through that cycle throughout the day. But what a lot of people don't understand is there's actually some biochemistry behind this. When your blood sugar goes high, your body secretes this this hormone called insulin from the pancreas. Insulin does its job. It's a great hormone, does its job. One of its jobs is to reduce blood sugar, because we don't want chronically high blood sugar. So insulin swoops in, brings blood sugar down. Everybody's happy. We go on about our day and we go eat, we go exercise, we have fun, right? But what a lot of people don't understand is one of the effects of insulin, when it's secreted and it has this effect on blood sugar, meaning it's trying to lower blood sugar. So blood sugar is high, insulin is high. Biochemically, it actually triggers this cascade of events that just about turns off your body's ability to burn fat. So this is where body composition and really trying to manipulate body weight and body composition comes into play, because the most important thing for anyone who wants to do this is they have to optimize their blood sugar. So they decrease their insulin quantity, if you will, or secretion from the pancreas, because we don't want insulin triggering decreasing your body's body fat stores to be used as energy, right? So we're trying to control blood sugar, but at the same time, we're trying to control insulin, because if insulin stays just kind of at bay, our body can burn more fat as long as we're controlling blood sugar. So it really, to be honest with you, it comes down to food. It really does. Like, instead of having the banana, have the banana with nut butter, have a Greek yogurt instead of a normal yogurt. It has more protein. It balances blood sugar better. So there are some really easy ways. And I hate using easy and weight loss or body composition in the same sentence, because it's not easy, but there are some easy ways to do it, as long as you go about it methodically with optimizing blood sugar as your main goal.
So it leads into my next question, because you're talking about adding nut butter to banana, and that has a combination of macronutrients. So when we look at that, should a meal contain protein, fat, and fiber? Like, is that an ideal macronutrient breakdown for blood sugar control?
Absolutely. And I did not mention fat earlier in my carbohydrate to protein ratio. And here's why. What we know, and again, this is research that I pulled from people with diabetes, and why we don't put fat into any type of ratio, because in non-vegan or non 100% plant-based eaters, you are getting, most likely you're getting enough fat in your daily nutrition, because if you eat an animal protein, there will be fat in there. Even if it's lean, there's still going to be a little fat in there. So I usually don't worry about people who are not vegan getting enough fat, because they usually do. The ones I do worry about are my vegans, are my 100% plant-based, because now, even though they may be eating a lot of nuts and nut butter and things like this, maybe they're using some oils, maybe they're not, their fat intake is usually a lot lower, which means we need a little bit more fat in their daily nutrition plan to support not only satiety, but also blood sugar control. So just like you said, almost like I give people, I have a 90-10 rule, right? So 90% of the time you are putting together protein, fat, and fiber at all meals and all snacks. 10% of the time, we're human. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. So enjoy life a little bit, right? But yeah, fat is absolutely needed. But again, we don't have to, if I'm eating, a piece of chicken and some salad or whatever, I mean, kind of boring example, but I know there's fat in the chicken, and maybe I even cooked it in some oil or whatever. So I don't really need to worry about that too much. But, if I'm making like a tofu scramble that has tofu and some veggies, maybe I do need to just be a little more strict with using oil or something in there. Maybe I add some seeds to the dish or something to get a little bit more fat.
Excellent. Now let's transition a little bit to metabolic efficiency training. We talked about metabolic efficiency. I know you've talked a little bit about that, but where does exercise come into this? To where how does it improve our ability to be more metabolically efficient, or can it?
It can, absolutely. And this, metabolic efficiency training, this is the equation that I set with it. So metabolic efficiency training equals 3/4 nutrition plus 1/4 exercise. So you get much more of a robust effect on improving your body's ability to use fat as energy. Like we've been saying, this whole improving metabolic efficiency, you get more bang for your buck changing your nutrition than you do your training or your exercise. But it's not to say exercise is not important. It's extremely important for many different reasons that we won't talk about, but specific to metabolic efficiency training, here's what we know. And this is where the data in the 1950s and 60s came about, where they only looked at exercise, right? What they found, and it still holds true, any type of aerobic exercise has an effect on the cellular level of improving the mitochondria. That's the kind of the site where ATP is made. It's kind of the big powerhouse of where we make energy. So aerobic exercise makes our body more efficient to actually, at the mitochondrial or cellular level, to actually burn more fat. So it's absolutely 100% true. But here's what I find. A lot of people don't train aerobically, right? Because we all have a time schedule. We have an hour lunch and we're like, man, we got to get the most bang for our buck, or we're doing CrossFit or doing a HIIT class, or maybe we go for a run, but we go with a friend of ours and maybe that friend is a little faster. So now all of a sudden I'm not running aerobic anymore. So the main point is, yes, you can use exercise. About 25% of the equation is aerobic exercise will improve your body's fat burning ability. However, it takes a lot longer. If you can imagine, like when you're trying to get into shape, it takes a little while, doesn't it? Like it takes months to get into shape sometimes. But nutritionally, here's the thing. I have found, because I actually created the exercise physiological test for this too, to measure metabolic efficiency. So I've done all of this stuff. I found that if you change nutrition, and I'm not talking going like crazy keto diet or anything, I'm just talking about controlling your blood sugar, using the hand model, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio. If you do that, I have actually shown in my lab, it is not research, let me just put that, it's just in my lab, that you can change your metabolic efficiency, so improving your body's ability to burn fat, in 7 to 10 days, Tavis. So wow. That's the power of nutrition. I'm not going to discount exercise. It just takes a lot longer to only try to get there with aerobic exercise.
So I'm getting on a plane to come to Colorado and come to your lab. So
that's right. That's right.
I need to shed some fat.
We'll get you. Yeah, we'll get you tested for sure. Yeah.
So you've answered a couple of the questions. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just so your listeners understand, like, you don't have to guess either. Like I said, like shortly after I developed this concept, because I'm also a physiologist and this was really my first trade, I developed the physiological test to measure it. So you don't have to guess. And there are centers, performance centers around the country, actually around the world, that do metabolic efficiency training. Biasly, I think I do it the best because I created it, but there are ways for your listeners to go out and have this measured. And they can easily find, well, kind of easily find a center that hopefully is near them. It's not in every state and every city, but I see them popping up more and more now.
Well, at the end of this, we're going to put your information in the show notes, try to have them reach out to you for more questions.
Perfect.
Now, you may have touched on that. I know you talked about aerobically, helping more burn fat, but what about, so training intensity does have an impact on this. You mentioned CrossFit versus maybe going for a 30-minute walk. That does impact, the shift or the becoming more efficient at burning fat, correct?
Huge. Yeah. And I'm a big fan because I'm also a coach, as you know. Like I coach athletes, an endurance coach, and strength. I write strength programs and stuff. So I don't want to discount like high intensity training, lifting. That is so important for so many additional things. You're talking longevity, you're talking athletic performance at a young age, older age. So I don't want to discount that, but that should definitely be in the equation with some type of aerobic training. So I usually, and I know we all have limited time, but I try not to ask people to decide one or the other. I'm like, listen, you have 7 days in the week. Let's structure it to where, I like, let's do some yard work. That can be aerobic training, right? You don't have to train like for a marathon or whatever to still get those benefits of aerobic exercise. But sometimes we do need to go somewhere to lift weights or lift heavy stuff or move heavy stuff, unless you are doing a lot of manual labor. But I do want to make sure that we have that message of wanting to combine those, whether it's structured in the weight room, strength and conditioning, and, doing a sport for aerobic training, or just real life lifestyle stuff.
Yeah, I'll say, if they want to come do some intense yard work, just come here in the heat of
I know.
They can come hang out with me for about an hour. So we can.
Yeah. Well,
right.
And you get that, right? So you think, it takes you how long to mow your grass? Like 1 to 2 hours, and you extrapolate that over the days, like you're getting some great aerobic, I don't know if it's aerobic sometimes, but some great aerobic exercise.
I think sometimes it's becoming anaerobic because I purposely bought a lawnmower that is not self-propelled, so I can get a little bit more kind of like that, pushing that sled when it gets into a little bit more of a wetter section.
I love it. I love it.
I come in and my wife's like, you look awful. Like you look like I'm covered with grass. So it's just, it's pretty fun. All right. So we've talked about using fat as fuel and becoming more metabolically efficient, but let's talk about the ketogenic diet. You mentioned it. It's a super popular diet. And is going keto similar to what we're discussing today? Like, are they using body fat when you're eating that much fat, or are you using fat from the food source?
Yeah. Well, let me start off by saying, as we know, but maybe some listeners don't know, the keto diet goes back at least 100 years now. I mean, it's been around and it comes and goes. It's one of those things, right? But to answer one of your questions, metabolic efficiency training, I specifically set that up without ever mentioning the word diet, because in my mind, when I hear diet, I think of elimination. I think of not consistent. It's definitely not long-term. You can't fit it into your life, at least long-term past, 8, 12 weeks. Some people do, but not athletes, right? So I think of keto as very restrictive, very elimination-based, which we know it is. I mean, you have to drop your carbs so low, it's not even funny. And your fat intake is so high, and protein is actually fairly low to moderate, to be honest with you. So metabolic efficiency training is nowhere near a keto diet. Can you adjust your carbohydrates and protein and fat in metabolic efficiency training? Yeah, absolutely. That's periodizing your nutrition, and that should be done, but it's not a ketogenic diet. So I am not anti-keto. I think there's great clinical opportunities to implement that in clinical practice. We see epilepsy, we see seizures, what else? Dementia, Alzheimer's, even. Like, there's some really good interventions. I don't believe it really fits in athletics, though. I just have not. And I've worked with some really great ultra runners. So if you can imagine, these guys and girls are going days and days and days at lower intensities. So, you would maybe say, yeah, maybe having keto or following keto would be good because you can burn more fat. And it is, but here's the thing that you sacrifice when you're on keto in terms of sport. You sacrifice any upper end or higher intensity efforts. So what if you have a climb? What if you have to do a finish line sprint or whatever? Like, you're not going to have enough carbohydrates in storage to be able to do that. So if you want to go long and slow for days and days, and you want a very restrictive elimination based thing, I guess keto would be good. But that's about it. I'd never, oh my gosh, talking about to young athletes, never in a million years, like, don't get me started on that one. But keto should only, like, if anyone's thinking about it, please make sure you're an adult, because we do not want to interrupt the developmental phases of puberty and pre-puberty and then post-puberty. Those are just very delicate stages for young athletes.
Excellent. I want to keep the topic around carbohydrates a little bit, because I know we're just, it's a macronutrient that gets demonized in so many media,
so much
magazines, social media. I see people posting about how bad these things are, but why do you feel carbohydrates get so much negative press when it comes to losing weight, especially fat?
Yeah, honestly, and we've been doing this a long time, and like I grew up as you did. It was the whole food guide pyramid, and just plug as many carbs as possible. Remember that, the high carb, low fat, right? And I think what's happened is, what we've noticed from that approach, at least in the United States, is health numbers are, they're not great right now in the United States. We know there's a lot of chronic diseases, and you can put any finger on it and do whatever blame you want. But I believe what's changed and really demonized carbohydrates is the whole keto diet, low carb, high fat reintroduction, because it's already been in our society. It just got sparked again. I believe that's what started carbohydrates being demonized yet again. In addition to all of these processed, refined products that manufacturers are putting on our shelves, I think that's not helping the case at all. So unfortunately, that is what I see. And there's two, Tevis, but someone goes keto or even drops their carbs, not following keto, but maybe they drop their carbs for a few days, they're going to see instant weight loss, right? What they don't understand, it's all water. Right. It's not fat, but they get excited and they're like, hey, I'm losing weight. I'm toned down. I'm not as puffy, whatever. I'm not as bloated. And all of a sudden, then they're like, oh, well, I can't have fruit in the morning anymore, or I shouldn't have a sandwich anymore because it has bread. And you're like, that's not the right approach that we're focusing on here. Like, the approach should be, how do we eat like very beneficial carbohydrates that have fiber and vitamins and minerals that actually will help stabilize blood sugar? Because that, at the end of the day, it's not about a diet. It's how do we put food together to stabilize blood sugar, to improve our health and improve performance. That's what it really comes down to.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, it's just something that people just still struggle with. They want that instant gratification.
I know.
Like, I need them right now. And they don't want to wait. So you mentioned this, I think, a little bit earlier. Are there types of carbs that can impair your ability to burn fat or use fat as a fuel source?
I think if you start talking, if we're just talking about burning fat, I guess you could argue, you could have a spoonful of sugar with a piece of chicken, and it's gonna stabilize your blood sugar because protein is gonna save the day, right? I'm not a big fan of all the processed, refined carbohydrates out there, because they have basically no nutrients. All it has is sugar, and that simple sugar, if you will has the incidence of spiking blood sugar much quicker, much easier. Those are the difficult ones, or the difficult carbohydrates to put into your nutrition plan. And it's really what I'm talking about is like the snacky foods out there. It's usually the boxed or the packaged, not all of them, but those types of carbohydrates, the ones you find at sporting events, swim meets, at the snack station or whatever. Like, those are the real very, very low end carbohydrates, because they're just, at that point, they're just providing calories. There's no nutrient density. They're going to take a hit on your blood sugar a lot more profoundly. So it's just going to make it tougher versus eating like whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, rices and beans and stuff like that. Those are the things we want to build into our daily nutrition plan, and not those simple, processed, refined, snacky carbohydrates.
Yeah. Well, I love how you mentioned in the question before, just about really the food industry, right? Because when you look at carbs, there's not like new proteins coming out. Like, there's not like a new steak coming out, or here's a new form of chicken. It might be flavored, But there's also new ways of making potato chips. Like here we have a company, I won't say brands, but there's like a hamburger flavored potato chip, or
Yeah.
we're known for grilled oysters and crawfish in Louisiana. There's a brand that actually makes a grilled oyster flavored and a crawfish flavored potato chip. And I'm like,
Oh
I
my
have to
gosh.
try that. It's like, I'm just
Totally.
curious to see if it tastes like crawfish. But
Yeah.
those things are just, it's the predominant choice. All right, last topic as we kind of dive into this. Another popular approach to weight loss or fat loss has been intermittent fasting.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people like to do this and they think, all right, if I do this, I'll lose weight. And it works for some people that can follow that. And when someone does a fast, so 12, 16, 20, 24 hours, right? Is that a way for them, to become more efficient at burning fat as fuels? I know it might not be anything to do with metabolic efficiency, but are they becoming more efficient at using their fat stores?
Yeah. Well, let's qualify this really quick. For any listeners who have young kids, young athletes, never think about intermittent fasting with young ones. Please. No. Like that's just not good. Okay. So get that out of the way. Now we're kind of focusing on adults. Here's the thing with intermittent fasting that I don't think a lot of people understand. Like in my world, most of the time, like after dinner, you shouldn't really have that much, right? I mean, unless you have a dinner like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and, you go to bed at 11 o'clock, there's a lot of time to try to control blood sugar again. But here's the thing, like we should already be having like an overnight fast of around 10 to 12 hours, right? So interestingly enough, it takes the body roughly 12 hours to get into more fat burning state. So you can start doing the math right now and say, okay, what time was my last meal? What time do I wake up? What time do I start introducing calories? You might be already on that 12-hour cusp. There's nothing, here's the confusion part about intermittent fasting. There's no set protocol. And you even mentioned it when you open this up, like there's 16-hour, 20-hour, 24, 48, 36, 72, like there's all these fasts. There's not one that's right or wrong, right? What I find that like 16 hours is usually doable for people because they might not eat breakfast anyway. To your question, Tavis, will it help improve the body's ability to burn fat? Well, let me set this up. When you wake up in the morning, all of us are malnourished and we're dehydrated, right? Based on what you do in the morning from a food perspective, you could spike blood sugar, which remember, again, if you spike blood sugar, you pretty much turn off your body's ability to burn fat, right? So you can spike your blood sugar or you can feed it something that actually has a, protein, fiber, and fat. Let's say, I don't know, eggs and some fruits and maybe a piece of toast, something like that, something that's balanced. That will not spike your blood sugar, which means you're still burning fat with a very quote unquote balanced meal. So my argument to intermittent fasting is, okay, I know what it does. You're just basically decreasing your calories that day, which if that's what you're trying to do, so be it. But I don't usually do that a lot with athletes because some of them get into the trouble of saying, all right, if I'm going to skip breakfast and not eat until lunch, and maybe they do a window, the time restricted feeding window, they might not be eating enough, right? Or so then we might risk low energy availability, which has this whole other issue, right? Or they may gorge themselves in this time window that they eat. So now they're actually eating more calories than they would if they would have just eaten breakfast. So will intermittent fasting burn more fat? Well, yeah, because you're just continuing your fast. I mean, that's just basic science, right? So if you eat nothing, drink nothing in the morning except for water, you're not doing anything to your blood sugar. So of course it's going to burn more fat because your blood sugar is still kind of in that kind of stable level. There is kind of a spike of blood sugar in the morning, then it starts coming down with cortisol. But my whole thing is, with athletes, if you're training in the morning and it's a quality training session, like it's an important training session, you better put some type of calories in your body. And it's probably going to be mostly carbohydrate depending on the session, because the last thing you want. So I actually have this question and answer with a lot of athletes. I'm like, well, what do you want? Do you want to teach your body to burn more fat by restricting calories and not eating anything? Or do you want to have a good training session? And guess what? You can have a good training session and burn more fat just based on what food you put together before the training session. So personally, I know we haven't talked about longevity. I know the aging and longevity data is there, and it's really becoming pronounced with intermittent fasting. And I totally get that. But if we're talking about athletes, it doesn't make a lot of sense most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
So it seems like, what you're telling us, to kind of wrap up a little bit, number one, from a weight loss or fat loss, especially for adults, calorie deficit at the end of the day is going to be critical, but also blood sugar stabilization with combination of macronutrients just to keep your body, sustained throughout the day, where you're not up and down with blood sugar and insulin and you're hungry all the time. So that way you have a little bit more control over how much you're eating. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. As we close out, a couple of things I want our listeners to kind of find out a little bit more about. Just, you have, I think, a certification program to help practitioners understand metabolic efficiency. Is that metabolic efficiency training? Let me rephrase
Correct.
that. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that involves?
Yeah. So I started this in 2012, and it's called, a metabolic efficiency training specialist. It's all online. It's only for health professionals, so that you got to meet some prerequisites to be able to get in. But I never planned on offering this, Tavis, just like I never planned on metabolic efficiency training being, public. But I had a lot of dietitians and physiologists and coaches were like, hey, I want to learn more about this. I'm like, oh, well, listen to this webinar. And they're like, no, I really, really want to learn. So I actually certify people around the world in doing this. And, they can find that information via my website. And there's a separate website just for metabolic efficiency training. So, they can locate these professionals in their area. They might do testing also, which is a bonus. Not all of them have the opportunity to have the metabolic cart in the testing facility, but it's a great way for practitioners to engage in learning more about this somewhat still after, I don't know how many years it's been, 17, 18 years. It's still kind of flying under the radar, but I think more and more people are starting to learn the whole metabolic efficiency training, balancing blood sugar for sure.
Awesome. So I'll put that in the show notes, the website, where people can learn more about that. What I'm excited about is this little entrepreneur background that you have, and kind of like myself, you like to put your hands in a few things, and you have this great food product and company called All Around Snack Company. I'm looking at what's called the gourmet snack mix of dark chocolate and tart cherries. It's like a trail mix with some dark chocolate, which is pretty much my favorite, a mix of things like walnuts and almonds. I think obviously tart cherries, which is great for inflammation, this little protein puff. So tell me what got you into wanting to create, these type of products.
I never wanted to be honest with you. So this was my COVID project, I call it. It was 2020, and I've been working. I'm the sport dietitian at the University of Denver here in Colorado, and I've been working with their gymnastics team for 4 years now. And after the first year, I'm like, this is interesting. Okay, my girls are snacking, but they're not like, I wasn't really keen on the snacks they were having. So as a sport diet, if they were having snacks, right? And if they were, it was just some things that were more processed and really just wasn't really good for health or performance, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll find something. So I went out, I'm going to grocery stores, I'm looking online, I'm like, and I've got 3 kids, Tavis. I'm like, I know how hard it is to find snacks. And even like for my kiddos, I'm like, geez, how do I do this? So I was looking and nothing passed my test. Like, it had to be portable. It had to be non-perishable. It had to taste good, right? Of course, because, any type of athlete is like, no, most athletes are like, I want this to taste good. So basically I was trying to fix a problem that my gymnast, if they were snacking, I wanted to provide them a snack that actually had a balance of nutrients, because we've been talking about this metabolic efficiency, right? It needed carbohydrates, but it also needed proteins. So it couldn't be like applesauce or goldfish or, anything like that. So I basically I grew up in the mountains here in Colorado. I did a lot of camping, backpacking, loved trail mix. We called it GORP back in the days, right? But I wanted to kind of recreate that. So I'm like, okay, let's see. I know people eat trail mix. I didn't want it to be peanuts, raisins, and milk chocolate because, number one, those are just filler ingredients. Number two, it's high sugar content, and there wasn't really many performance or health benefits to some of those things, right? So I was like, okay. And you mentioned it, like the only nuts in my gourmet snack mix are almonds and walnuts for health purposes, like walnuts, high omega-3s, anti-inflammatory, all this stuff. And even down to like the dark chocolate, I don't know if you noticed, but it's 72% dark chocolate. But here's the thing also, like I went to the next level and found a chocolate, because what was important for me is for chocolate not to have any soy lecithins. I wanted it to have sunflower lecithin. So I can't tell you how long it took me to find chocolate chips, dark chocolate chips that were 72% dark chocolate that did not have soy lecithin, because just about everything has this. And I wanted to keep that out of my mix, right? And but and then like you said, like that flavor has dark chocolate, has tart cherries, inflammation, anti-inflammatory benefits. But really the secret weapon was I wanted it to be a complete protein, right? We can eat nuts, which are great, but I wanted this to be a complete protein source. All the essential amino acids, I needed to kind of sneak some more protein into my gymnast daily nutrition anyway. So I found these protein puffs, right? These little balls of protein. And it's a balance of casein and whey. So you've got some fast acting and slow acting protein. I actually coat them, depending on the flavor. I'll coat them with either honey and cinnamon or turmeric and black pepper and ginger, depending again on the flavor. But what that does is it stabilizes blood sugar better, provides all the essential amino acids. The leucine is through the roof, like seriously, is such high leucine, and that's the key amino acid, as we know, that stimulates muscle protein synthesis. So that was my first creation, and here's. So I introduced it to my gymnastics team. They're like, hey, this is pretty good. And I only had one flavor, right? And they're like, yeah, this is pretty good. I'm like, great, here's some, enjoy. And just doing it because I'm, got a warm heart. And here's the thing that really spurred this though, Tavis. I gave it to my daughter. And my daughter's a little particular in how she eats, right? And she actually liked it. And when she liked it, I just about had a heart attack, number one. But that, as the entrepreneur, I'm like, oh my gosh, wait a second. My daughter likes it.
Yep.
These female gymnasts like it. There might be something here. And that's like, I just on a whim, I'm like, you know what? Let's turn this into a COVID project. Like, let's get this out to the world. And, it's not, I'm not in any grocery stores and anything. It's kind of, using my circle of friends, but I do have some NFL teams, NBA teams, a lot of D1 universities using it. So it's starting, it's kind of getting there. And I've got 2 more product lines. I've got some energy bites, which are just food-based bites. I've got some protein puffs that if you remember Cheetos, right? I've got one flavor that's cheddar cheese, but it kind of reminds you of eating Cheetos, right?
Yeah.
But it's all protein. Like I think you have a bag of like 1 ounce of these cheddar cheese protein puffs have 30 grams of protein. So
okay, I'm ordering some.
Yeah. I am basically, and I have been on a mission for many years of trying to increase protein in people's daily nutrition plans. That has been like one of my lifelong goals because we're just so under protein. We just are, right?
So I'm chewing now. I had a little mix of the walnut, the dark chocolate, and the protein puff are connected. It's just so good. And even my daughter Grace, who's 11, she's like, Dad, this is really good. And she rarely eats.
I love that. That is the best feedback ever.
So if you can get young kids, so we'll put that in the show notes because we want people to understand a little bit more.
Yeah.
Bob, this was a great podcast. Just a wealth of knowledge as you always are. But you're not done yet because it's curveball round time, which is really
curveball.
3 questions I wrote down. I always write them down while the guest is talking. The first question is, I have a new question I've never asked anyone before because it's related around food. So I'll get to that one last.
Okay.
But the first question is always the staple first question. I'm a music junkie. So if someone says, hey, you could be the lead singer of any band or any music group today or of any time, who would that be?
I think it's more of an era. I grew up classic rock. I love classic rock to death. I grew up with the Eagles. So I tell you what, put me in that band with Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
Okay, we'll call it Hotel Colorado instead of
Colorado. There you go.
All right. Question 2, what would old Bob tell young Bob? So if you had to go back and talk to young Bob, what would Bob today go back and tell young Bob?
Part of it would be like slow down a little bit in your 30s and 40s and enjoy that time. Like I feel like there's a lot of stress during those decades with many things, like especially if you have a family. I just think like slow down, just enjoy the ride a little bit more, enjoy your friends, enjoy your family, and try not to put your nose to the grindstone every single day.
Yeah. If someone told me, hey, this is what you're going to feel like after you have a child and worry about them all the time, I would probably have second thoughts about like, wow, that's a lot of stress, because I didn't believe in
Totally.
anxiety and stress before all
I,
this. And now I'm like, where is she? What is she doing? Is she in school? Did someone
oh,
kidnap her?
oh, Tavis, wait till she goes to college. Oh my gosh.
Okay,
It's it's
this
that next
question.
level.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is. So I'm going to cherish these next 7 years of what's left of it. Make
Yes.
the decision.
Yes.
All right, last question. This might be pretty tough, but you probably will have an answer for this. If you could only choose 3 foods or 3 meals for the rest of your life to live on, what would those 3 foods or 3 meals be?
That's actually pretty easy, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Eggs, peanut butter, and blueberries.
Now put that in a blender and let's see what happens.
That blend, I'm not quite sure. I do have a breakfast that kind of, catches people's attention. That is basically fried eggs with peanut butter on top, a banana, and cinnamon. That's one of my favorite breakfasts. But if I just had 3 foods, those are really the top 3 that I could probably eat the rest of my life.
So the other day, my wife comes home and she looks in the refrigerator. She's like, "Where'd the blueberries go?" Grace literally ate almost the entire container of blueberries.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's pretty
That's
funny. Yeah, no, it's great. It's good to have a child with a pretty wide palette of foods and just loves just about everything. And she even takes her liquid fish oil at night, drinks tart cherry juice before bed. And I'm like,
I love it.
created a monster, but a good
Yeah.
one.
You
She's
should
coming
be
to me,
proud
she's
of
like,
that.
"Dad, where's the fish oil?" I'm like, "Oh, wow. Okay."
Yeah, I know. My daughter did the same thing. My daughter's a freshman in college now, and she's like, are you gonna send me with my supplements? I'm like, are you gonna take them? She's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, proud dad moment right there.
There it is. Well, thank you so much, Bob. It's always great to have your expertise to share that with our listeners, and I'm sure they're going to take a lot of this information of what they've learned today and just apply it to real life.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. It's always great catching up with you.
Awesome. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Tavis.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.